Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. Today in this video I'm going to be demonstrating how to print, assemble and use this PDF pattern to make a long jacket. Now this is a pattern that you can print from the comfort of your home. You can print it on simple A4 sheets, tape everything down together and cut it down to whatever size that you desire and use it to make your garment. You can use this to make a long jacket all the way down to the floor. You can also use it to make a midi dress and a top as well. So if you'd like to see how I work with this pattern, make sure to keep on watching, give this video a huge thumbs up and let's jump straight into the tutorial. After downloading the PDF file, I'm going in here to print the pattern on A4 sheets. Because of the size of this pattern design, I ended up printing this on 44 pages of A4 paper. So just ensure that you have enough paper in your printer to print out everything. You can print this at home in your studio. Just press play and let it print out on its own. Once everything is out, ensure you check out the instructions and assembly details that come with the patterns. They will come in very handy. Also double check which size that you want. You can also mix sizes. That's something I really recommend. If you're someone who is in between sizes, you have the freedom to do so as well. Now the next thing I'm going to do here is to cut down the paper. Now the paper has these dashed lines that are all around each A4 sheet, and we added that to ensure a case of when you cut out the pattern and join everything together, you don't lose any measurements. So I'm just cutting that off on each sheet of paper. This takes a little bit of time, but just put on your favorite podcast, listen to some music, or have a cup of tea, or watch your favorite show. I was literally watching a YouTube video when I was doing this right now. Trim everything down and then set it aside so you move on to the next step. I have cut down all of the pages and this is a quick update of how it is looking. So I've kept them in groups of similar patterns. So on this bottom pile here is all of the pieces for the back, and then all of the pieces for the sleeve, and they kind of connect and interweave into each other, like the pocket weaves into the pattern for this particular piece here, which I believe is the collar or the belt, this one there. And then we have the pieces for the front all laid out here, and the assembly is pretty straightforward. You essentially just have to follow these numbers here, these ones. So here it says D4 on this sheet. You just need to find the corresponding sheet or the next sheet that has the same number, and you see the connection happening on the side as well, from this one onto this one. That says C5, this is C5. So it's just like a very fun puzzle playing game at the end of the day, just connecting everything together. So I'm going to tape everything so we have all of the patterns joined, and I'll most likely cut it down to a size 8 or 10 and use it to make the long line jacket or duster. So I'm going in here to use some clear sellotape to join all of the pages of my pattern together. A great tip would be to do this in groups if you're overwhelmed by the number of pages you have to work with. You find similar looking pieces and you join them together like I'm doing with this sleeve piece here. You can decide to join all of the bits horizontally and then connect them, like one horizontal panel joined together to another horizontal panel joined together, or you can join them as vertical columns and then connect them together like that. Whichever you feel works best for you, do that. I find that organizing them in groups just makes it a lot easier to do, and it just means I'm looking for paper less. I just know where this group is and I join everything together. So these are the main sheets of pattern joined. You have the piece for the front, you have the piece for the back, we have the belt, the collar, the pocket and the sleeve. For people who would like to keep this like this, I would highly recommend that, because that way it's just a case of you going back to this and then trace off whatever size you want to work with. Maybe you make clothes for your clients or for family and friends. You can just trace off whatever size you want and then work with that and keep this as a plan. But if you're going to be using this pattern for yourself or for a client for just one size, you can cut this down to whatever size that you would like. This goes from a UK size 6 to 16, and I highly recommend you double check your measurements with the size chart. You might find that maybe you want a more relaxed fit, so you would cut it down to a bigger size, or you want it to fit a bit more snug on your body, and then you cut it down to the size that correlates with the measurements that you have in mind. Now, once you've decided on what size you would like to keep, or if you're keeping this as a plan, you just store it away and trace off the size you want, you can go ahead and cut it down to that size. You have the opportunity to cut the pattern to your actual size and then add your seam allowance straight onto your fabric before you cut, or you can cut the pattern one size bigger, so that way that additional size around the pattern becomes your seam allowance. Around the pattern, you would find little indicators showing what exact size you're cutting, and that would guide you if you are cutting the first, the second, or along the third line, and you essentially just need to cut along that around the entire pattern. So like I'm doing here for this front piece. So you need to cut down the front, the back, the collar, the belt. The pocket is just one big piece, but the sleeve you need to cut down as well. The sleeve has a hem allowance of 2 centimeters, but you can make the sleeve even longer if you want it to really be exaggerated and long on the body. So these are all of the patterns cut down to my UK size 10. You should have a front, a back that both have waist darts. This is the pocket piece as well that is going to sit into the side seam, and then this is what the sleeve looks like. And then you also get a belt and a collar piece. It's just a simple collar that goes around the entire front neckline, back neckline down to the other side, so you have a nice clean finish. My fabric of choice for this lightweight jacket is this cotton canvas, and this feels really nice and sturdy, and it has some body to it. I would highly recommend you get a fabric that is 60 inches or wider. That way you're able to fit more patterns onto your fabric. For this particular jacket design, I ended up using about 3 meters of fabric to create a jacket that was size 10 when I was done stitching everything together. With my pattern pinned onto my fabric, I'm just going in here to cut out the size that I want, and I'm cutting around the front, the back, the pocket, the sleeve, the belt, everything that I'm going to be needing to create my jacket design. This I have cut in such a way that I don't need to add seam allowance as I'm cutting it. I have cut it a size bigger than I would like it to fit on my body, so that is where my seam allowance is going to cut into play. Don't forget to cut your notches where necessary. Once the notches are all cut in place, we can move on to sewing. Good morning. So I'm done cutting out all of the pieces for the jacket, and I ended up cutting the lining. Even that when I started off, I didn't want to line the jacket, but I realized you could use the same body of the jacket or the dress or the top to create a lining. You would then sandwich the collar between the lining and the main body panel. I'll show you what I mean, but these are all of the pieces here. So I have the front and back of the lining. I cut it in this burgundy cotton fabric to pick up from this shade that the main fabric has. This material is kind of like a canvas heavy duty cotton, so I'm hoping it would do me well during like the autumn fall season of like, you know, September, October, before we go into winter. So that's the main jacket all cut down here. For the sleeve, I have that one here. I have the collar and the belt. I cut a pair of each, and then I have my pockets, which I've cut 2 pairs in the main fabric. So I'm just going to get on to stitching and show you guys how to assemble everything together. Off camera, I have pinned my darts on the main piece and on the lining as well. This I have transferred from the pattern along the 4 points that, you know, make a dart come together. So I've pinned it. I have marked with a chalk the exact points I need to stop on my front and back pieces for the main and the lining as well. Now the lining is the same length as the front, so when I stitch it along the hemline, everything is finished really nicely. But first, I'll need to go in to sew all those darts in place, remembering to do my back stitch at the beginning and at the end. Step 6 would be fitting in the pockets. This is going to be an inseam pocket that sits on the side seam, and the pocket is 10 inches below the arm curve. Once I have that sort of indicated with a pin, I'm going to grab one side of my pocket facing, and I'm going to be putting right sides together, and I'm going to sew this for my back as well as the front pieces. You need to put one side of your pocket facing for each side of the seams, so when you connect everything together, you have the pocket bag come to life. This I'm going to take to my machine, and I'm going to be sewing on a 1 centimeter seam allowance, which is roughly how much seam allowance I have, and the difference between each size is 1 centimeter or half an inch when you convert them. Now once I had all those pockets stitched in place, I'm going in here to join the front to the back along the shoulder seam and along the side seam as well. And for the side seam, I essentially need to start from the top of the arm curve and then stitch around the pocket, work my way down to the bottom of that pocket, and then stitch up until the hemline. Now I'm going in here to start with the shoulder seam, sewing on my 1 centimeter seam allowance. I'm going to do this for the left and for the right hand side of my piece, as well as for the lining. The lining, I've stitched down all of the dots. I've joined the shoulder seam, the side seam, and the lining does not have the pockets, anything there. It's just a straight seam on the side. So when you join the lining to the garments, you have a nice clean finish on the inside as well. For the belt and the collar pieces, which are the long rectangular pieces, you can decide to cut them on a fold if you have the amount of fabric that is required. You can also cut them as 2 pieces and then join them together along one edge, so you have a seam on the center back if it's a case of the collar, or on the back if it's a case of the belt. That's another way that you can do it. I've gone ahead to pin right sides together of my belt and collar pieces, and I cut these as 2 pieces. You can cut it as one continuous piece if your fabric is enough, but you can cut it as 2 pieces. Just cut a size up so you have seam allowance to connect everything together. I'm going to be joining it on my machine using a normal straight stitch. Remember to do my back stitch at the beginning and at the end. And then for the belt, I'm essentially just sewing with right sides together. I'm sewing up the sides, and once I'm done sewing up the sides, I'm going to turn the belt inside out and then close off the ends, so the top and the bottom ends, so I have a nice finished belt that I can use to tie up the waist of the jacket. I'm going to set that aside, and this is what the collar is looking like. The collar, I essentially just stitched that connecting point at the center back, and then I pressed it with the wrong sides together so I can connect it to the neckline of my jacket. And I'm going to be grabbing my jacket, which I've joined on the shoulder and on the side seam, and I'm going to be pinning the collar along the neckline. I always love to start from that notched center back end and then pin to my left and to my right, so I don't have a case of where it's too tight somewhere or it's too loose somewhere. Once the collar is all pinned up in place, I'm going to now grab the lining piece, and the lining piece is what I'm going to use to finish up that particular seam and finish the inside of the jacket really nicely. So I'm going to be putting right sides together of my lining to the right side of my main jacket, which already has the collar pinned, and I'm going to pin it all the way around, so the neckline, the center front, and the hemline, and I'm going to be sewing around the entire piece. And I'm going to be sewing on 2 centimeters along the hem and on 1 centimeter along the front edges and along the back neckline as well. You would want to leave a little bit of an opening at the bottom because that's how you'll be able to turn this entire piece inside out. I left about 3 to 4 inches opening after I stitched it all in place, and once you have that stitched together, I'm essentially just going to turn this inside out so I can reveal the right side of my jacket. After turning it inside out to show the right side, this is the point you will need to go back in along that open hemline and just tack it down with needle and thread to finish it off. The last step in this process is to obviously sew and join the sleeves onto the jacket, and I have my sleeve pieces here. The first thing I need to do with them is to connect them together along the side so we have a sleeve to attach to the armholes. I'm sewing on a 1 centimeter seam allowance here, and after stitching I actually took this to my overlocker to overlock the edges on the side seam and on the hemline. To create the puff that this sleeve design has, as you can see here, you would need to stitch with the longest stitch on your machine. Once that is done, you pull the thread to create the gathers, which would, essentially help you create the puff that the sleeve design has. Once you are done doing that, you need to join the side seams together with right sides facing each other of the sleeve. And after doing that, you need to either overlock or use a zigzag stitch or use bias tape to finish that side seam. In terms of the hem, I essentially just went back in to overlock the hemline. I folded it one time, I stitched it around, and that's how I did the sleeve. This you need to do on both sleeves before you go ahead to attach it to the armhole of your jacket. Now this is what the sleeves are looking like. I repeated the same steps for the left and for the right hand side. I also hemmed the bottom, and then on the sleeve head I have stitched with my longest stitch, and that is going to allow me to pull the thread to create gathers that would make the puff sleeve that we love on this piece. Now I'm just going in here to grab the relevant piece for the complementary side of the garment, and I'm going to be pinning with right sides together, starting from that bottom side seam up on the way to the top, and spread the gathers in such a way that everything is concentrated on the sleeve head. This I'm going to take to my machine, and I'm going to be sewing both sides of the sleeve into both sides of the armhole. I'm stitching on a 1 centimeter seam allowance. Stitching sleeves like this can be a little bit tricky, but if everything has been pinned correctly, if everything has been gathered away on the sleeve head, it should fit and it should be somewhat easy to do. After that, I'm just going in here to overlock both sleeve seams to finish up the jacket. This is what the finished piece looks like. I love the fact that I used this really fun, colorful print for my jacket. I love wearing colors when it's cold and gloomy. It just makes me feel better when I look at color, when I look at bright prints. I hope you guys enjoyed watching this video. This is more like a demo that is attached to the PDF available on the store. This PDF is actually available to pre-order at $24.99 up until the 10th of September, and from then onward the price goes on to £44.99. I'm going to leave a link down below. I try to make this pattern versatile and multi-use so you get more value for your money, and it's multiple sizes. So if you're someone who runs a small business, this is a design that you could play around with and add your own flavor and your own styles. I'd love to see what you guys create with this pattern, so please tag me on social media at Kimdave Designs. And until my next video, have a good morning, afternoon and evening wherever you are. Bye.